in white businesses.
They were not allowed to spend their money in
No,
white businesses.
that's not true. We spent our money in white businesses.
I thought the whole point of Jim Crow laws in the South was that you had segregated businesses.
But they still spent their money in white businesses.
I mean, but if you're forced, if you couldn't go to white businesses,
no,
then
you could go to them.
I understand, but
you
I'm saying that it's still
couldn't sit down at the same counter with them, but you were allowed to go in there as a black person or black people and spend your money.
I mean, it seems like.
How do you explain that then? Because the black dollar, quote unquote, is there in the community.
Okay.
Okay. It's Hasan Piker and Jesse Lee Peterson. And Jesse Lee Peterson does a good job of schooling Hasan Piker, but Hasan Piker makes good points as well. This is about systemic racism. It's going to be bringing in Jim Crow. And I like Jesse Lee's calm strategy here. He asks questions to honestly understand Hasan Piker's position. Hasan Piker is calm as well. And it gets a little heated for a second, but very, very steady and solid debate by Hasan Piker, Jesse Lee Peterson. And this is something that we're going to talk about, systemic racism, blaming capitalism, all that. Let's go.
The fact that, legally speaking, there was still limitations of as to what black people could and could not do probably forced black people to create black-only businesses. And that was the reason why.
It wasn't black-only business. White people.
I mean, it wasn't black-only businesses, but black-owned and operated businesses that served exclusively black customers. Historic black colleges is one example of this.
Why don't black people today start businesses in their own communities so that the so-called black dollar can stay in their community?
I believe they are. I think there's a lot of there are a lot of movements to foster this sort of growth. And it's great, but it's not enough. And the reason why it's not enough is not necessarily because like a black culture is one way or the other. It has nothing to do with that. It is a systemic problem. It's a problem of redistribution.
What do you mean by that?
By and large, like because of redlining and because of systemic racism and things that you are aware of yourself because of your personal experience.
That doesn't exist.
Systemic racism does not exist.
What is systemic racism? What do you mean by that?
Like racism built into the structure of legislation, even if it doesn't have, even if it's not intentionally or specifically written off as like blacks can do this versus what whites can't do.
Like what? Give me an example of systemic racism.
Outcomes or studies that show when controlled for all other factors that black people still get longer sentencing for the same exact crimes in comparison to other races. This would be one example of that.
If they had lawyers instead of government lawyers or court-appointed lawyers, would they get longer sentences then if they could afford to buy their own lawyer?
Hasan Piker assumed that because Jesse Lee Peterson is black, that he was going to go to the typical black angle. As you know, systemic racism, as you know, and Jesse Lee Peterson said, no, I don't know, and explain to me what you mean, a definition. We have to get definition for these words. I did not like Hasan Piker definition. Jesse Lee claps back at Hasan Piker on systemic racism. Tell me, what's your definition? Tell me in the comments. Let's get back to it.
Probably not, but why can't they buy their own, why can't they afford their own lawyers?
Because they have kept themselves in poverty. So
why do you think they've kept themselves in poverty?
That's a good question, but I need to ask you this first and then respond.
Okay.
Just to hear your point. If black people got married, fathers and mothers raised their children, set a good example, provided for them, would they be in the situation that they're in today if they had two parents?
Jesse Lee Peterson he reminds me of, in a way, Shannon Sharpe. Shannon Sharpe says this all the time. I'm from the South. I have kind of a drawl, and people kind of confuse that for me not being smart. And I can understand there's some people who say, oh, you're low IQ. And they go to this realism concept of everyone that's this is high IQ, everyone who's this is low. But really what it is people generally have traits based on where their ancestors are from. If you grew up in a desert climate, one of your positive traits is you have protection from the sun, melanin. If you grew up in a cold climate, you have your protection from the cold weather, you're used to it. And then there are potentially some IQ stuff. But when you look at Southern Democrat, or some not Democrats, I'm so used to saying Southern Democrats, Southern people who have a drawl or they talk a certain way, I make the same mistake too. You can say that about rappers and all that. Some of these rappers are really smart guys. You hear them in the interview. Charlemagne the God recently interviewed Lil Baby, and Lil Baby doesn't sound very intelligent when you hear him talk in the interview. He just can't speak. Very hard for him to speak. He doesn't communicate well. But he is a very smart guy. And that's the thing with Jesse Lee Peterson. I think it took Hasan Piker off guard here. It still takes a lot of people off guard how smart he really is. I'm going to do a close where I break this down. A strong point where I actually disagree. He started it off here with money in the black community and where it went. I strongly disagree with Jesse Lee Peterson. And that's going to be the finish him at the end of the segment. Let's get back to it.
Probably not, but I'm not in the Thomas Sowell school of thought that the government is forcing black people. Thomas Sowell?
Who's that?
Thomas Sowell?
I don't know who that is.
He's a black thinker who was a Marxist.
Oh, Thomas Sowell.
Oh, well, English is my second language.
No,
I'm
no
Turkish,
problem. No, I just
so
didn't know.
sometimes I mess up
Right,
names.
no
So
problem.
if that's the case, then I'm sorry. Thomas Sowell.
I'm
Okay.
black and I don't speak English either. I'm
Okay.
slow. So don't worry about it.
I don't know if that has anything to do with your blackness, but
If
okay.
black kids were born with two parents in the homes, and the fathers and mothers guide them in the right way to go, provided for them, would they be?
They would probably have better outcomes than now, but would it
Probably,
actually
or would
solve?
they?
Would it actually solve a lot of problems? No, and the reason for why is because of a lack of redistribution. And what I mean by that is, like the Chicago public school system, for example. That houses 75 to 80% of all of the kids in Iowa, yet only gets or in Illinois, sorry, not Iowa, and only gets 60% of all funds. This is a gigantic problem.
If they allow school vouchers, would that give the black family a way out?
I'm not a believer in school choice. I think that
So you
voucher
want them
programs
stuck in
and
the
charter.
public school?
No, I want the government to redistribute funds in a way that yields better outcomes.
So you want the blacks in public schools. That's why you're not for school vouchers?
No, I want every public school to be elevated to
But
a
that's
level
not
where
gonna, that's not going to happen.
Why not?
Because it's a government school. The government never going to take care of you.
Well, I believe that the government should take
Did
care
you have a
of us.
question for me?
I forgot what it was.
Oh.
Wait, what were we talking about? Oh, the families, right? We were talking about like
Did
black
you have
families.
a father and mother in your home? Were you
Yes.
raised by two parents?
Yeah.
Do you think life would have been different for you had you not been raised by two parents?
Probably, yeah.
Okay. So if blacks were to get married, stop having 77% of the children
let's
out
ask-
of wedlock,
Yeah.
would they have a better life?
Okay, answer this though. Why?
Would they have a better life
But
first?
why?
I
Yes, they
answered
would.
that.
Why?
Why what?
Why are black people having 77% of African?
Before he answers that real quick, part of this, what the Hasan Piker is going through is on the left, they attack traditional family values, man and woman in the household, like that's what you need. And so Hasan Piker is getting nervous because he doesn't want to fully agree. He's agreeing, but he doesn't want to come out and fully agree with Jesse Lee Peterson.
African-American children are born out of
77% of
wedlock.
black
Why?
children are born to black women who are citizens of the country because
Why?
they have no morals.
What, they have no morals?
Yeah.
That's a interesting accusation. Is there any data to back up that claim?
I don't need data. I just need my eyes.
Okay, all right.
They have no
so you have
moral.
your feelings, you have your
in the
feels
no,
over
not feelings.
reals.
No. When I was growing up, black men and women got married. That made a difference. They worked hard. That made a difference. They didn't get free stuff from the government.
Are you familiar with
That
what
made a
anecdotal
difference.
evidence is?
And they didn't have affirmative action based
Okay.
on color.
Are you
Hasan Piker does not, and the many people on the left, you can call them progressives, I say populist left, a lot of people don't like when I use that term, whatever you want to call this, a lot of them don't have morals, they don't believe in God. So when you bring up morals, they say, well, I want data on morals. You want data on morals? Morality is here in the heart. There's no data You can bring up, if you want to look at data for the fall of our society, you can do that, but that's not the point. Let me bring this back for the finishing close here.
Finish him.
11 minutes. This is where it started. Jesse Lee Peterson makes great points about the fathers in the home, family values. That's the structure for education, for the nourishment that a child needs to succeed in life, much less education. But he's wrong. Jesse Lee Peterson is wrong about the Civil Rights Act. He's wrong about Jim Crow. Let's bring it back.
23 days. It circulates within white communities for 20.
They're going to talk about money. Let's bring it back to the money now. Jim Crow. We're talking about Jim Crow.
Complaining now.
It's a really interesting concept that I've been thinking about a lot recently. I think Killer Mike did an episode on this particular thing that you're talking about on his new Netflix show, Trigger Warning, where he looked at the dollar and how long a single dollar stays within the black community. And apparently, $1 stays for only 6 hours within the black community. As soon as a black person makes $1, they take it out of the black community in 6 hours. And that's because there are a lot of commodities that are created by.
So let's talk about a time when, if you want to talk about within blacks, generally speaking, that money stayed within blacks. And I'm not an identitarian like they are, but let's just talk about the truth of the matter. The money stayed within that place more before the fake Civil Rights Act, which was a disaster in our country. I'm going to get to that.
By white people or white-owned businesses or Asian people and Asian-owned businesses. Now, that same dollar circulates within, I believe, Asian communities for 23 days. It circulates within white communities for 21 days. That disparity is causing a significant economic problem for black people. I agree. And that's.
I agree with that. I don't see any lies there. If that's no lies. If you are on you can say, does that matter or not? That's a different discussion. Is this true? Yes, this is true.
Probably the reason why in the Jim Crow era, in comparison to today, black people might not have had these same civil liberties, but they were able to work together because they were forced to.
Listen to that. I don't know if he would say that now. I'm curious to see if Hasan Piker would still have that same take. This is a great take by him here.
Problem for black people. I agree. And that's probably the reason why in the Jim Crow era, in comparison to today, black people might not have had these same civil liberties, but they were able to work together because they were forced to work together.
But they spent their money in white businesses.
They were not allowed to spend their money in white businesses.
No, that's not true. We spent our money in white.
This is where Jesse Lee Peterson is wrong. So he says during Jim Crow that the skin color that he roots for, because he is an identitarian in that manner, the skin color that he roots for, they spent the money in another community. He's wrong here. Not before Jim Crow ended. That's not right. Hasan Piker is absolutely right. He's confused. What are you talking about, Jesse? Jesse needs that narrative to stay within his beliefs that the Civil Rights Act was good, because when you're brought up in school, you're taught that Martin Luther King Jr. came through and and everybody fought for rights, civil rights, and it's all a good thing. No, it's not.
Together.
But they spent their money in white businesses.
They were not allowed to spend their money in white businesses.
No, that's not true. We spent our money in white businesses.
I thought the whole point of Jim Crow laws in the South was that you had segregated businesses.
But they still.
Hasan Piker is absolutely right. That's literally the whole point. Literally the whole point. It sounds silly now. That's why it ended. It sounds silly now that the point of Jim Crow was to keep the money circulating amongst a small group of people while the bankers and others didn't get a hold of that money. That's why it ended.
Not allowed to spend their money in white businesses.
That's not true. We spent our money in white businesses.
I thought the whole point of Jim Crow laws in the South was that you had segregated businesses.
But they still spent their money in white businesses.
But if you're forced, if you couldn't go to white businesses,
no,
then
you can go to them.
I understand, but I'm saying that
so
it's still forced.
So you see the talk there. What I want to talk about is I want to get even deeper than that. Of course, that was a problem. Let's look at the culture before Jim Crow ended. What you want to make sure happens is that your federal government does not discriminate against people. so your federal government doesn't say, you have this skin color, you have to pay more taxes. I don't want that. Nobody wants that. But that's already in the Bill of Rights. You don't need a Civil Rights Act to do that. The Civil Rights Act now starts protecting certain classes. So if I'm in an interview, and whether you agree with it or not, and I see a skin color I don't like or I do like, whatever that means, I want to say, no, that's not what I'm looking for here. You can't do that. Why? I have a private business. Why can't I do that? If I want to have a private business and I want to say, no, nobody who wears a red shirt, nobody who has Jordans on, nobody who has a tiny little red hat on, nobody who does this, nobody who looks like that comes in. That's my business. Why shouldn't I be able to do that? Recently, there was a pizza story. There's all these stories about this was a pizza. I don't know what kind of wedding they were doing. Maybe it was informal. It was a wedding of people of the rainbow. It was a rainbow gathering of the new age degenerate style rainbow. And the pizza place said, no, we're not catering it because we don't deal with the rainbow lifestyle. That ain't for us. Incoming lawsuit, just like the Colorado cake maker. I make cakes. I have a private business. I'm not the government. I don't contract with the government, because if you contract with the government, then you are the government. I'm not the government. I make cakes. I don't want to make cakes for rainbows. For the rainbow people, ain't for me. For the Richard Simmons of the world, ain't for me. This is not my take. I'm just describing the famous, I forget the name of the actual Supreme Court case, but the Colorado cake case. Why can't the cake maker decide who he makes cakes for? If he wants to lower his potential for revenue, go ahead and lower your potential for revenue. A business that doesn't lower their potential for revenue should be able to come in the market and squash them out if it's that big of a deal. Let's look at the culture during Jim Crow. This is the same take that Byron Donalds had. Hasan Piker had the same take that Byron Donalds had. Byron Donalds was talking with a bunch of the people with that skin color that normally don't like Trump. The 90% of women didn't vote for Trump of that skin color. Byron Donalds said, wait a second, let's take a look at Jim Crow. And then he got really criticized for it because his wife is of another skin color. What does that have to do with his take? His take was absolutely right. When we look at the stats, in segregated communities before Jim Crow ended, money often circulated more extensively among that darker skin color owned businesses and residents due to forced segregation. Hasan Piker was right. Remember, they had Greenwood District is known as the Black Wall Street. Before its destruction in 1921, famously, unfortunately, Tulsa's Greenwood District had a robust economic circulation within a black community, if you want to call it that. A single dollar could reportedly circulate 36 to 100 times, staying within the community for nearly a year before leaving. Black Bottom, pause, but that's what it was called. Detroit's Black Bottom area had the same type of economic circulation patterns during segregation at its peak, and that wasn't even in the South. At its peak, it was home to approximately 100,000 black residents and 300 black-owned businesses. And it was safer then than any black community. I hate this word community. It was safer then. Those areas were safer than the black areas of today. Where's the success of the Civil Rights Act? All the Civil Rights Act did was say the creme de la creme of the skin color. As soon as you get out of there, you get out of there and don't come back. That's all it said. That's all that happened after the Civil Rights Act. Jim Crow laws effectively created a parallel economy. So it was forced community reinvestment. It actually worked out better. Then why did Jim Crow end? I'm gonna wrap up with this. Why did Jim Crow end? I'm gonna play Dom Luker here talking about it. He was on with the Hodge twins, and then we're gonna have real talk.
I always say
I'm gonna have talk here that you don't see it anywhere else. Let's play Dom Luker here.
black people don't need to move forward. We're the only race in America that needs to go back. You look at us prior to the 1964 civil rights.
There it is. You look at it prior to 1964 civil rights movement. He says we. I don't use that term because I don't associate and understand the skin color, but not culture-wise or the way they use it. They don't believe in the realism. The birth in terms of participation, I'm going to let this go without the sound. We were better in every single way is what he said. 1964 Civil Rights Act came, which was originally going to be implemented by JFK, but it was altered by Lyndon B. Johnson. He altered it and changed it from black prosperity to dependency, and black lives got worse. So the father wasn't the figure, it was the government was the figure. He said we were marching and telling people we're lesser than, creating a narrative for them to tell us that we're lesser than we actually were, is what he's saying. He's using the word we. It was a setup. That's what Dom Luker said. And then I commented on that as well. Here's what I had to say about it. I had a lot to say about it. This is going to go on the topic of the tiny hats. You can't do it. The purpose of the you can't do it without talking about it. The purpose of the civil rights movement was to take the money from that community in those parallel economies, and it was to get that money moving to the tiny hats. Long history of tiny hat involvement in civil rights. They prop it up as a good thing. I look at it as it was very smart for your end. You saw money circulating in a group that you couldn't get into because of legislation. Let's end that legislation. Very simple to see. Very simple to see what they did. The tiny hats wanted their businesses in those areas to take that money out and get it. They couldn't get into those areas because of Jim Crow. They pretended to be friend of that area to end Jim Crow. Then on top of that, they used propaganda to pit the black against the white and then put their own tiny hat businesses in the black areas. Not complicated, obvious to see. And then I even did more receipts with it and broke down the actual businesses that were there. If you look at it from Goldsmiths to Gus Blast Company, Riches in Atlanta, Cohen Brothers in Jacksonville, Neiman Marcus in Dallas, Sakowitz in Houston, May Company in St. Louis, Garfinkel's in D.C. That's not even all of it. Why do you think tiny hats were involved? Out of the kindness of their heart? Did the money go from blacks start going from the black communities to the tiny hats after the Civil Rights Act? Absolutely. I have the receipts right there. Were those tiny hat businesses in the black areas prior to the Civil Rights Act? No, they weren't. Jesse Lee Peterson, where are you at? Talk to me, holler at me. What are you talking about that the money didn't circulate within? Of course it did. And it's plain as day, and it's obvious once you start looking at it. Let me know what you think.